She was 8 months pregnant when her husband pulled over on a frozen highway. Christmas Eve, 18 degrees below zero. A blizzard so fierce you could not see your own hand in front of your face.
Not in the
He
storm.
looked her in the eyes, and he told her to get out.
Claire,
Not because the car broke down,
are you all right?
not because of an emergency, because his mistress was also pregnant, and he had already emptied their bank account, already sold their house, already planned every detail of her disappearance. He drove away and left her to die. What Marcus Holloway never calculated was this: his wife would survive. She would walk 40 minutes through a killing blizzard with his daughter inside her. She would collapse on a stranger's doorstep. And that stranger, a billionaire widower who had shut himself away from the world after his own devastating loss, would open his door and change everything. But surviving the blizzard was only the beginning, because when a man like Marcus Holloway loses control, he does not walk away quietly. He sends lawyers. He manufactures evidence. He threatens the one thing Claire loves more than her own life. And when his family decides that silence is not enough, they send something worse than lawyers. Stay with me until the very end. Because the moment Claire stops running and starts fighting back, that is when this story becomes something you will never forget. Lesson statement. This is a story about what happens when a woman loses everything and discovers that everything she truly needed, she was already carrying inside her. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone you love, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below and tell me what moment hit you the hardest. Your words help this channel reach the women who need to hear stories like this most. Share this with someone who needs to know that surviving the worst night of your life is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of the real one. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we bring you stories of real courage, real heartbreak, and the kind of strength that only reveals itself when everything else is stripped away. You belong in this community. Stay with us.
Christmas Eve, Vermont, 18 degrees below zero. A woman stood alone on a frozen highway with nothing but the clothes on her back and a baby kicking inside her. Like it already knew something was wrong. No phone, no wallet, no coat worth the name. 8 months pregnant in a maternity dress and ballet flats, because she had dressed to impress a family that never liked her anyway. Behind her, red taillights disappeared into a wall of white. Her husband had just told her to get out of the car, not because the engine died, not because of an emergency, because his mistress was also pregnant, and he had made his choice. And Claire Holloway was no longer useful to him. The wind screamed down the mountain like something alive. The snow came sideways, stinging her face, filling her lungs with cold that had no bottom to it. Claire stood there, on Route 7, and watched the taillights vanish. She said out loud, to no one, "He actually did this." The baby kicked hard. Once, twice. Claire pressed both hands over her belly and made herself a promise. She did not know if she could keep it. She did not know if she would survive the next hour, but she made it anyway. The way people make promises when the alternative is giving up entirely. She said, "It is just you and me now, baby girl, and we are going to walk." What Marcus Holloway did not know that night was that his wife would survive. What he never imagined was that a billionaire widower would open his door to find her frozen on his doorstep. And what he absolutely never planned for was the war that would follow, the enemies who would rise, the evidence that would surface, and the fire that would burn inside Claire Holloway until justice was finally, completely, permanently served. This is her story, Stay until the end, because this ending you will never see coming. The drive from Boston had started badly and gotten worse. 2 hours on the highway to Marcus's parents' estate in Stowe, Vermont, and Marcus had barely spoken 20 words to Claire the entire time. He kept glancing at his phone on the center console. Quick looks, small smiles he thought she did not notice. Claire noticed everything. She had been noticing things for 2 years and choosing not to say them out loud. That was the deal she had made with herself without realizing she was making it. Keep the peace. Keep the marriage. Keep trying. The windshield wipers scraped back and forth against the snow. Back and forth. Back and forth. A losing battle against a blizzard that had been building since noon. Claire shifted in the passenger seat, trying to find a position that did not ache. 8 months pregnant, and every bump in the road sent jolts of discomfort through her body. The baby moved restlessly, as if sensing the tension that filled the car like something invisible and poisonous. She said carefully, "Traffic is bad tonight." Marcus said nothing. She said, "Do you think we should call your parents? Let them know we are running late?" He picked up his phone, typed something quickly, set it back down. She watched his profile in the dashboard light. The face she had loved for 7 years, high cheekbones, square jaw. The kind of handsome that photographs well and keeps its secrets in person. She had memorized that face in 1,000 tender moments and was only now beginning to understand that she had never actually known it. The SUV slowed. Marcus steered toward the shoulder of the empty highway without signaling. The tires crunched against ice and gravel. Vermont Route 7, stretched in both directions, swallowed by whiteness. Nothing in either direction but snow and cold and the Christmas music playing on the radio. Silent night. Holy night. All is calm. All is bright. Claire said, "Is something wrong with the car?" Marcus put the SUV in park. She said, "Did you hear a noise? We can pull into a gas station and—" He said, "Get out." Claire laughed, a nervous sound, uncertain. She said, "Very funny. You almost had me. Now what is actually—" He said, "I am not joking, Claire. Get out of the car." His voice was flat, rehearsed, the voice of a man who had been practicing this moment and was now simply executing it. His phone buzzed on the console. He had been texting someone for the past hour. She had watched it happen from the corner of her eye. Watched his fingers move over the keyboard whenever he thought she was looking out the window. She placed both hands over her stomach. The baby kicked hard. She said, "Marcus, it is 18 degrees outside. We are in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town is probably 20 miles away, and I am 8 months pregnant. Whatever is happening, whatever I did wrong, we can talk about it. We can fix it." He turned and looked at her. His eyes were blue. She had fallen in love with those eyes at a charity gala 6 years ago. They had looked warm then. They had looked like home. They did not look like home now. He said, "Sophia is pregnant too. She is due in March, a few weeks after you, and I have made my choice." The words hit Claire the way cold water hits skin in winter. Shock first, then the delayed arrival of understanding. She said, "Sophia, your assistant." He said, 3 years. "She understands me in ways you never could. She supports my ambitions instead of holding me back. And now she is carrying my child, the child I actually want. 3 years." The number dropped into Claire's mind like a stone into deep water. 3 years of lies. 3 years of a double life. 3 years of sleeping beside a stranger who was dreaming of someone else. She said, "But I am carrying your child too, our daughter." All those fertility treatments, all those appointments, all that heartbreak and trying and hoping, and now, finally, he said, "That was a mistake. An accident that never should have happened. I thought I had taken care of things. Apparently, I was not careful enough. Claire went still. Taking care of things. She did not yet understand what that phrase meant. She would understand it soon, and when she did, it would be worse than anything she could have imagined in this moment. He reached across her body and unlatched her seatbelt. The click was impossibly loud in the confined space. His hands were rough, impatient, already somewhere else entirely. She grabbed the dashboard. She said, "Marcus, please, I will die out there. Our baby will die. You cannot." He said, "That is not really my problem anymore." He shoved her toward the door. The door swung open and cold air rushed in like a living thing. Snowflakes hit her face, filled her lungs. Her knees hit the frozen ground with a crack that sent pain shooting through her hips and up her spine. She scrambled to her feet, slipped twice on the ice, pounded on the passenger window with both fists. She screamed, "My phone! My wallet! Marcus, please! I have nothing!" Through the snow-streaked glass, she could see him checking his reflection in the rear-view mirror, adjusting his collar, running fingers through his perfectly styled hair as if he was preparing for a date rather than leaving his pregnant wife to die. The SUV pulled away. The engine revved as Marcus accelerated back onto the highway. Taillights glowed red through the swirling snow. Two cold eyes, watching her without feeling. Then they disappeared, swallowed by the white. Claire stood on the frozen highway in the wreckage of her life. The wind tore at her inadequate coat, stole the warmth from her body, 1 degree at a time. The snow pelted her face like tiny fists. She thought, "This cannot be happening." She thought, "He will come back. Any second those taillights will reappear. This is a test, a nightmare. He is not capable of this." The road stretched empty in both directions. He did not come back. Claire had done 3 years of nursing school before Marcus convinced her to quit, before he told her that his wife did not need to work, before she gave up everything she was to become everything he wanted. That training surfaced now from somewhere in the back of her mind, like a survival manual she had never meant to need. Frostbite begins within minutes at these temperatures. Hypothermia sets in quickly after that. Core temperature drops, confusion, drowsiness, unconsciousness, death. She might have 30 minutes, maybe less with the wind chill. She forced herself to stand straight, made her wooden legs move, 1 foot in front of the other. That was all she had to do. She walked, the road curved ahead and disappeared into a wall of white. She had no idea which direction led to civilization. No idea how far she might have to walk. The snow was already past her ankles. Her ballet flats soaked through in the first 30 seconds. She could not feel her toes. She walked anyway. For her daughter's sake, she walked. She had been walking for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 40 minutes when she saw it. A flicker through the trees, a warm glow cutting through the relentless white. Lights. Actual lights. A building. Claire pushed forward with renewed desperation. Her legs burned. Her lungs screamed with every frozen breath. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. The trees opened up, and she saw it clearly for the first time. A massive stone estate on a gentle hill. 3 stories of gray stone and dark timber. Windows glowing golden against the storm. A long driveway lined with snow-covered hedges. A wreath on the front door. Icicle lights hanging from the eaves. It looked like something from a Christmas card, or a hallucination, or the kind of vision that came right before you froze to death. Please be real, she thought. Please, please, please be real. The driveway seemed endless, each step harder than the last. The strange warmth spreading through her limbs was not warmth at all. She knew that. She knew exactly what it was. She reached the front door. Massive oak, iron fixtures, a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. She reached for it. Her fingers would not cooperate, would not close around the cold metal. Claire collapsed on the doorstep. The cold stone pressed against her cheek. Snow dusted her eyelashes, her lips, her hair. She thought, I tried. I fought. I walked through a blizzard with my daughter inside me. She thought, I am sorry, baby girl. Mommy tried. Her eyes drifted closed. The last thing she heard before the darkness came was the creak of the door opening above her, and a man's voice, rough with shock, and something that sounded almost like hope, cutting through the howling wind. He said, My God, Margaret. Call Dr. Marsh. Now. Strong arms lifted her from the cold stone. Real warmth surrounded her. A heartbeat that was not her own pulsed against her cheek. Then there was nothing but darkness. Warmth was the first thing Claire felt when awareness returned. Not the false warmth of hypothermia. Real warmth. The kind that seeped into frozen bones and reminded them what it meant to be alive. The kind that came from roaring fires and thick blankets and the presence of other human beings who had chosen to care whether you lived or died. Someone was rubbing her hands between theirs, large hands, strong but careful. A man's voice said, That is it. Come back to us. Just keep fighting. Claire forced her eyes open. The world swam into focus slowly, dark wooden beams crossing a high ceiling, a chandelier dripping with crystals, firelight dancing on walls covered in silk wallpaper, the smell of wood smoke and old books, and something warm brewing in another room. The man leaned into her field of vision. Mid-40s. Salt and pepper hair swept back from a high forehead. Dark eyes set deep beneath heavy brows. A face that might have been handsome once, before grief had carved lines around his mouth and shadows under his eyes. Handsome still, in a weathered way, like a house that had survived too many storms. He said, You are safe. That is what matters. My name is James Whitfield. You collapsed on my doorstep about 25 minutes ago. Claire tried to sit up. The room spun violently. She fell back against the cushions. He said, Easy, you nearly died out there. Hypothermia was setting in. Another few minutes and your core temperature would have dropped below recovery. His voice was calm, but his eyes told a different story. He had been afraid for her. This complete stranger had actually been afraid she might die on his doorstep. She said, The baby. He said, Strong heartbeat. My housekeeper, Margaret, used to work as a nurse. She checked twice. He pressed something cool into Claire's palm. A stethoscope, he said. I thought you might want to hear for yourself. Claire placed the stethoscope against her belly with trembling hands. James helped her. Position it correctly, his touch careful and clinical. She pressed the earpieces in and listened. Thump, 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 thump. Her daughter's heartbeat. Fast and strong and beautifully, impossibly alive. Claire choked on a sound that was half laugh and half sob. She said, She is okay. Oh God, she is okay, James said quietly. She is a fighter, like her mother, apparently. An older woman appeared in the doorway. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Wire-rimmed glasses. She carried a tray with a steaming mug and wore the brisk expression of someone who had spent decades taking care of other people and considered this a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The woman said, Tea is ready, Mr. Whitfield. Chamomile with honey and a splash of brandy for medicinal purposes, and I have got the guest room warming up. James said, Thank you, Margaret. Margaret set the tray down, helped Claire sit up, and tucked pillows behind her with the efficiency of a woman who had learned long ago that comfort was a practical matter, not a sentimental one. Then she pressed the warm mug into Claire's hands and said, "Small sips, dear. Your body is still recovering. We do not want to shock your system." She paused and added, almost as an afterthought, "Also, ballet flats, in a Vermont blizzard, is genuinely impressive self-destruction. I say that with concern, not judgment." James said, "Margaret." Margaret said, "I am just noting it for the record. Despite everything, despite the cold still in her bones and the wreckage of her life somewhere behind her on Route 7, Claire felt the ghost of a smile. She sipped the tea. The chamomile was sweet and soothing. The brandy spread heat through her chest. She said, "Both of you, I do not know what would have happened if I had not found this place." James said, "You would have died. The hypothermia was affecting your cognitive function when I found you. Another 15 minutes and your heart would have stopped." He stated it plainly. No drama, no performance, just fact. And something about that directness, about being spoken to without being managed, undid the last of Claire's composure. She told him what happened, simply, without embellishment. When she finished, James was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your husband left you on a highway in a blizzard. 8 months pregnant." She said, "Yes," he said, "that is attempted murder." 2 words, clean and precise. The words of a man accustomed to naming things accurately. Claire said, "I know what it was. She stopped. 6 years. I just cannot believe that he—" She could not finish the sentence. Margaret was beside her in an instant. Strong arms around her shoulders, the smell of lavender and something baked, and the particular safety that older women who have seen hard things can offer without words. Margaret said softly, "Oh, you poor thing. What kind of monster does something like that?" Claire sobbed into the older woman's shoulder, the kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep and does not stop until it has finished with you. She cried for the husband she thought she had loved, for the marriage she thought was real, for the future that had shattered like ice on concrete. James stood by the fireplace, with one hand resting on the mantel near a silver-framed photograph. A woman with dark hair and laughing eyes looked out from the picture. Beautiful, full of joy. He said quietly, without turning, "What that man did was monstrous. You are not falling apart. You are surviving. There is a significant difference." Claire lifted her head, wiped her eyes, looked at this stranger who had saved her life and was now offering her something she had not experienced in a very long time: understanding without judgment, compassion without pity. She said, "Why are you being so kind to me?" James was quiet for a moment. His gaze moved from the photograph to the window, where snow still fell in endless white sheets. He said, "Because my wife would have expected nothing less. Eleanor collected people who needed help. She would have carried you inside herself if she were still here. She would have fought for you. Would have. Past tense." Claire looked at the photograph, at the sadness that lived in this beautiful house, like something that had moved in and forgotten to leave. She said, "I am sorry for your loss." He nodded once. The acknowledgement of a man who had heard those words too many times and still had no idea what to do with them. He said, "Margaret, please prepare the blue guest room. Our guest will be staying until the storm passes." He checked his phone, frowned. He said, "Which according to the forecast will be at least 48 hours. Claire said, "I cannot impose on you for that long." "There must be," he said. "The roads are completely impassable. Even if we wanted to move you, which I do not recommend in your condition, there is nowhere to go. Please stay. Rest. Let Margaret fuss over you, which she will do regardless of what either of us says. And let Dr. Marsh examine you properly when she arrives." He met her eyes then, dark and steady and filled with something she could not entirely name. He said, You can repay me by surviving. That is all I ask. Survive for yourself and for your daughter. Prove that man wrong about everything." He turned and left the room. Margaret guided Claire up the grand staircase. Family portraits lined the walls. Men in military uniforms, women in elegant gowns, children with dogs and horses, the confident faces of people who had belonged somewhere for a very long time. Margaret said quietly, "Do not mind Mr. Whitfield. He does not mean to seem cold. He is just broken. Has been since Mrs. Eleanor passed 3 years ago. Cancer." She fought hard, but in the end, she shook her head. She said, "This house used to be so full of life. Parties every weekend. Eleanor's laughter in every room. Now it is a mausoleum with central heating." She opened a door painted a soft shade of blue. The guest room was quietly beautiful. Delicate wallpaper with white flowers climbing toward the ceiling. A 4-poster bed piled high with quilts. A window seat overlooking gardens buried under 3 feet of snow. Margaret said, "Try to rest, dear. Dr. Marsh will be here as soon as the roads allow. And in the morning, things will look better. They always do." That is what Eleanor used to say. No matter how dark the night, morning always comes. She left. The door clicked shut softly behind her. Claire stood alone in the beautiful room, surrounded by luxury she had not earned, and kindness she had not expected. 8 months pregnant. No phone, no money, no home to return to. Abandoned on Christmas Eve by a man who had looked her in the eye and chosen to leave her to die. She walked to the window, pressed her hand against the cold glass. Outside, the snow fell in endless curtains of white. She said out loud, quietly, to the empty room, "He actually did this. He looked at me and drove away. And he did not care at all." The baby kicked, strong and sudden and almost defiant. Claire placed both hands on her belly, took a breath that rattled in her chest. She said, "Okay, baby girl, it is just us now. But we are alive, we are safe. And somehow, I do not know how yet, we are going to survive this. I promise you we will." The baby kicked again, harder, as if in complete agreement. Dr. Eleanor Marsh arrived at 7:15 in the morning on a snowmobile, having driven 2 miles through what she described upon entering as conditions best characterized as biblical. She was in her mid-50s, short gray hair cut with no patience for fuss, a face built for efficiency rather than charm. She carried a leather medical bag that had seen decades of service and set it on the nightstand with a decisive thump. She said, "I am Dr. Marsh. I drove a snowmobile through the apocalypse to get here. I hope you appreciate the effort." Claire said, "More than you know." Dr. Marsh said, "Good. Now let us check on this baby." The examination was thorough. Blood pressure measured twice. Temperature taken with the same care. The baby's heartbeat located and held for what felt like an eternity, while Dr. Marsh listened with an expression that gave nothing away. Then she sat back and delivered the news plainly. She said, "The heartbeat is irregular, not dangerously so at this point, but concerning given the extreme stress you both experienced. Cold exposure at your stage can trigger premature labor. Your body has been through significant trauma." Claire said, "How significant?" Dr. Marsh said, "There is a reasonable chance you could go into labor in the next 48 to 72 hours. If that happens and there are complications, you would need an emergency cesarean, and I cannot do that here safely. I have basic capabilities for most scenarios, but a surgical delivery requires equipment I do not have in a mountain estate during a blizzard." Claire said, "When will the roads be passable?" Dr. Marsh said, 48 hours minimum after the storm breaks, which has not happened yet. She squeezed Claire's hand. She said, I have been delivering babies for 30 years, including in far worse conditions than this. I will do everything in my power to keep you and this baby safe. But I am telling you the reality because you deserve to know it. The best thing you can do right now is stay calm, rest, eat, and keep your body recovering. She stood up and moved toward the door. Then she paused. She said, James told me what happened to you. I have practiced medicine in rural Vermont for 3 decades. I have seen every kind of human cruelty you can imagine. But what that man did to you on that highway. She shook her head. She said, You walked through a blizzard that should have killed you. That is not weakness. That is something remarkable. She left. Claire lay in the beautiful bed and breathed. In and out. In and out. Then she heard James's voice from the hallway. The landline still works. You are welcome to call anyone you need. Diane Foster had been trying to reach Claire for 43 hours. She had called every hospital in Vermont. She had called the police 3 times. She had driven to Claire and Marcus's house in Boston and banged on the door until the neighbors threatened to call the police on her. She picked up the landline on the second ring. She said, Oh my God, Claire. Oh my God. Where are you? What happened? Where is Marcus? Claire said, I am safe. I am at a house in the mountains. Someone found me. Diane said, Someone found you after what? What happened? A pause. Diane said, Marcus has been on the news. He is saying you had some kind of breakdown, that he dropped you at a hotel and you wandered off. Is any of that true? Claire said, He is lying. He pulled over on Route 7 in the middle of the blizzard and told me to get out, said his girlfriend was pregnant, said he was choosing her instead. Silence on the line. Then Diane said, I am going to need you to repeat that because I believe I just had a small stroke. Claire said, I know. Diane said, I am going to kill him. I am going to find that man, and I am going to. She stopped. She took a breath. She said, Okay. Okay. I have been doing some digging since you disappeared. Called in some favors. Accessed some records I probably should not have been able to access. Are you sitting down? Claire said, Tell me. Diane said, Marcus emptied your joint account 2 days ago, December 22nd. Every single penny. $147,000 transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, which I want to note is very on brand for a man who irons his socks. Claire gripped the edge of the bed. Diane continued, The house, Claire, your house in Boston, the one you have been paying the mortgage on for 4 years. It was never in your name. Marcus had you sign the papers as a witness, not an owner. The signature line for a witness is on the same page as the owner line. Easy to misdirect someone who trusts you completely. Claire said, That cannot be right. I remember signing. Diane said, You signed where he told you to sign. The house went on the market Christmas Eve, the same day he left you out on that highway. He had already listed it before he even got in the car with you. The walls of the beautiful room seemed to press inward. Claire said, How can there be more? Diane said, Claire, the IVF, the treatments that kept failing, the years of believing your body was broken. A long pause. Diane said, He canceled every appointment after the initial consultation, told the clinic you had changed your mind. They had no idea you thought you were still a patient. The doctor I spoke to was horrified. She said you were never failing, Claire. Your body was never the problem. He was sabotaging you every single time. The phone slipped from Claire's fingers and hit the tile floor with a sound like breaking bones. She could hear Diane's tiny voice calling her name. Claire. Claire, are you there? Claire, please answer me. She could not pick it up. 3 years of believing she was broken. 3 years of self-blame and grief and appointments that had been nothing but theater, while her husband stood beside her, playing the supportive spouse. 3 years of mourning a child she was perfectly capable of having, if only she had been allowed to. This was the thing that finally shattered her. Not the highway, not the cold, not even the discovery of the affair. This. Margaret appeared in the doorway. She crossed the room quickly and guided Claire into a chair, pressing a glass of water into her hands without a word. Margaret said, "Breathe, dear. Whatever you just heard, you need to breathe. Think about that baby. Think about staying calm for her." Claire breathed. In and out. Each breath felt like inhaling something sharp. He had not simply left her in the snow. He had spent years systematically dismantling her. The money, the house, the fertility treatments, the friends she had slowly lost during a marriage to a man who needed her, isolated and dependent, and unable to leave. She had believed every lie, trusted every false word, loved a man who had never seen her as anything more than a prop in a life he was building for himself. Margaret picked up the phone, spoke quietly to Diane, wrote down numbers, made promises in low, efficient tones. Then she sat down beside Claire in the beautiful guest room and said nothing at all, just held her hand while the snow finally stopped outside. And something inside Claire Holloway broke open completely. She let it, because sometimes the only way through is directly through. And because in that quiet moment, held by a stranger who had chosen to care, Claire understood something important. She was not broken. She had been systematically broken into. There was a difference. And that difference, small as it seemed in this moment of complete devastation, was the thing she would carry forward into everything that came next. The contractions started that evening. At first, Claire thought it was nothing. False labor, the baby stretching. She had felt similar sensations before, brief tightenings that came and went. But these did not go away. They came closer together, stronger, more insistent, like something that had made a decision and was not interested in discussion. Dr. Marsh appeared within minutes of Margaret's call. She said, "How far apart?" Claire said, 7 minutes, maybe 6. Dr. Marsh checked the baby's heartbeat, said, elevated but strong, "We need to try to slow things down." She said, "I want to be honest with you. Sometimes the body decides it is time, regardless of whether we are ready. Every hour we keep this baby inside gives her a better chance." They moved Claire to the master bedroom, the largest room, the easiest to work in if things became complicated. Margaret had transformed it with clean linens and everything Dr. Marsh might need laid out in careful order. James helped carry supplies. His face was pale, but his hands were steady, the calm of a man who had faced crisis before and learned to function through fear. He said, "What can I do?" Dr. Marsh said, "Stay close. I might need you." Diane had arrived by now, having driven up from Boston the moment a crack appeared in the storm. She sat in the hallway, outside the door, and did not pretend she was not listening. The hours stretched and contracted. Contractions came in waves, sometimes stopping for an hour, giving Claire's exhausted body a respite, sometimes rolling in every 5 minutes, relentless and demanding. Dr. Marsh monitored everything with the focused attention of someone who had done this hundreds of times and still treated each one as if it were the first. At 2 in the morning, James sat in the chair by the window. He had not left the room, had not slept or eaten, just watched and waited. Claire said, "You do not have to stay. This could go on for hours." He said, "I am not going anywhere." She said, "You barely know me." He said, "When Eleanor was dying, I sat beside her bed for 72 hours straight. I counted every breath. I was there when she closed her eyes for the last time." She said, "That must have been unbearable." He said, "It was the most important thing I have ever done. No one should face something like this alone." Claire looked at him in the dim light of the room. This stranger who had pulled her off a cold doorstep on Christmas Eve and had not stopped fighting for her since. She said, "Thank you," he said, "thank me when your daughter is healthy and Marcus Holloway is in prison and you have your whole life ahead of you." She said, "You sound very certain about that," he said. "I have watched you survive the unsurvivable. I am completely certain." At 6 in the morning, on December 26th, the real labor began. No more false starts. No more pauses. This baby was coming. Dr. Marsh worked with the calm efficiency of a woman who had earned her confidence through 30 years of exactly this. She called instructions to Margaret, who had transformed in a crisis into something close to a surgical nurse. Position changes, breathing techniques, the particular encouragement that comes from someone who has seen worse and knows how this can end well. James held Claire's hand. When the pain peaked, he said, "Look at me. Focus on my voice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. His counting was steady and low, and she focused on it the way a drowning person focuses on a rope. And then Dr. Marsh said, "The cord is wrapped around the neck." The words cut through everything. Claire saw the fear flash across the doctor's face before she could hide it. And then the fear was gone, replaced by the focused expression of a woman who had made a decision. Dr. Marsh said, "Stay calm. Let me work." Her hands moved with precision, manipulating, adjusting. The pressure was immense. The silence was worse. Dr. Marsh said, "One more push, Claire. Everything you have. Right now." Claire pushed, gave everything she had, and more than she thought she had. Silence. The worst kind of silence. The kind where a sound should be. Then a cry, small and furious and absolutely perfect. The most beautiful sound Claire had ever heard in her life or would ever hear again. Dr. Marsh said, and her voice cracked for the first time, "It is a girl, a perfect, healthy, angry girl." They placed the baby on Claire's chest, impossibly tiny, still wet from birth, dark hair plastered to a wrinkled forehead, fists waving in outrage at the indignity of existing. Claire looked down at her daughter and said, "Hello. Hello, Grace Eleanor. I am your mommy, and I am never, ever going to let anyone hurt you." The baby opened her eyes for just a moment. Dark blue, the way all newborns' eyes are, but with something in them, something fierce and determined and completely undefeated. James made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He said, "She is absolutely beautiful." Claire said, "Grace Eleanor Holloway." Grace, because only Grace brought us here. Eleanor, for the woman whose home saved us both. Dr. Marsh, who had maintained her composure through a cord delivery in a mountainous state during a blizzard without a surgical suite, turned away quickly and spent a very focused moment reorganizing instruments that did not need reorganizing. Margaret, who had not pretended for a single second to be composed, stood in the doorway with tears streaming openly down her face and said, "A Christmas miracle, a day late but still a miracle." Dr. Marsh turned back and said, 5 pounds, 2 ounces, small but healthy, lungs clear, heartbeat strong. Considering what you both went through, this is nothing short of extraordinary." She met Claire's eyes. She said, "Whatever that man told you about yourself, whatever he made you believe, none of it was true. You just walked through a blizzard and gave birth in a stranger's house with no backup. That is not weakness. That is the opposite of weakness." Claire held her daughter and let herself cry. Not the shattering grief of the night before, something else, something that was exhaustion and relief and gratitude and love all wound together into a feeling she did not have a word for. Outside the windows, the Vermont mountains were white and still and beautiful under the pale December light. Grace Eleanor Holloway slept against her mother's chest, and for one perfect moment, the world was quiet. 2 days after Grace's birth, the roads cleared. State police arrived first. 2 troopers in a cruiser that crawled up the still, icy driveway with careful determination. Sergeant Robert Walsh and Officer Jennifer Davis. They had been working Claire's missing person case since Diane filed the report and had spent 48 hours building evidence before they could get to her. The statement took 3 hours. Claire told everything: the drive, Marcus's texts, the exact moment he told her to pull over, his words, the cold, the walk, the doorstep. She told them about the financial betrayal, the emptied accounts, the house sold out from under her, the 3 years of sabotaged fertility treatments. When she finished, Sergeant Walsh looked like a man who had seen a great deal in 23 years on the job and was still capable of being genuinely appalled. He said, "This is premeditated attempted murder. He arranged his finances before he got in that car with you. He emptied the accounts, listed the house, and then drove you to that highway in the middle of a blizzard. The evidence of premeditation is overwhelming." He said, "We have already issued the warrant. Marcus Holloway was arrested that evening, at dinner, at Sophia's parents' house in Stowe." According to Diane's contact at the DA's office, he was genuinely shocked. He sat at a candlelit table with a 7-course meal in front of him and could not comprehend, even as the handcuffs went on, that this was actually happening to him. Diane said, "The look on his face in the mugshot is a gift from the universe. Charges: attempted murder in the 1st degree, reckless endangerment, financial fraud." The prosecutor was already reviewing the IVF sabotage for additional counts. Claire held Grace that evening and allowed herself to exhale. It was over. Marcus was in custody. The evidence was overwhelming. Grace was healthy and gaining weight and had developed a habit of making small, indignant sounds whenever she was set down, which Margaret found personally delightful and addressed by carrying her approximately 19 hours out of every 24. James had quietly begun arranging legal support. Diane was coordinating with the DA's office. Dr. Marsh stopped by every other day and pretended this was a medical visit rather than what it actually was, which was that she had become deeply invested in this particular outcome and intended to see it through. For one beautiful week, Claire believed the worst was behind her. She was wrong. The envelope arrived by courier on a gray January morning. Margaret brought it to Claire with an expression that communicated everything before a single word was spoken. Her face had the controlled fury of a woman who had seen injustice before and recognized it immediately. The return address read, "Whitmore and Associates, Boston, Massachusetts." Claire knew the name. Everyone in Boston knew the name. They were the lawyers you hired when you had unlimited money and no conscience and needed reality bent to your specifications. She opened the envelope. She read it once, then read it again, because surely she had misunderstood. James appeared in the doorway and saw her face. He said, "Claire, what is it?" She said, "They are suing for custody. Edward and Patricia Holloway, Marcus's parents, emergency custody of Grace." She heard her own voice from a distance, flat, disbelieving. She said, "On grounds of mental instability, they are claiming I have postpartum psychosis. They have statements from 3 psychiatrists I have never met. They have a sworn affidavit from Sophia Reed claiming I threatened to harm myself and the baby during my pregnancy." James took the papers. Read them with the practiced eye of someone who had spent a career dealing with corporate lawyers and their strategies. His expression grew darker with every page. He said, "They are also filing a motion to have all criminal charges against Marcus reduced." claiming the prosecution is biased, claiming the evidence was obtained improperly, claiming you fabricated the entire story as revenge for his affair. Claire said, "None of that is true." He said, "Truth is not the point. The point is what they can make a judge believe, and with enough money and enough manufactured evidence, they can make a judge believe almost anything." He set the papers down. He said, "There is more. They are discussing what to do if the criminal charges cannot be dismissed." He met her eyes. He said, "They want to make sure you cannot testify." The room was very still. Claire looked at Grace, sleeping in the bassinet beside her, 5 pounds and perfectly formed, and completely unaware that powerful people were already plotting against her before she was 3 weeks old. She said, "What do? I have nothing. No money, no home, no—" James said, "You have me, simply, without performance." He said, "My resources, my connections, my lawyers, who are very good at this. They want a war. Then we will give them a war, and we will win it." She said, "Why would you do this? You barely know me. This is going to cost—" He said, "Because Eleanor would have wanted me to." His voice caught slightly. "And because watching you fight has reminded me what it means to be alive." He reached out and touched Grace's tiny hand, a gesture so careful it barely qualified as a touch. He said, "This little girl deserves a mother who loves her, not grandparents who see her as a prize to be won. Now, we have 3 days before the hearing. I need to make some calls." He left the room with the focused energy of a man who had decided something and was already executing it. Claire sat in the blue guest room that had quietly become something close to home, and looked at her daughter, and felt the full weight of everything she was up against. Then she straightened her spine, set her jaw. She had walked through a blizzard 8 months pregnant in ballet flats. She could walk through this too. The hearing room was smaller than Claire expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of old paper, and institutional coffee. Judge Sandra Bellamy presided. Steel gray hair, reading glasses, an expression that gave away precisely nothing. Across the aisle sat Edward and Patricia Holloway. Edward was a larger, older version of Marcus. The same jaw, the same blue eyes, the confident bearing of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Patricia wore a designer suit that probably cost more than Claire had earned in a year of nursing, and sat with the rigid posture of someone who considered inconvenience a personal insult. Between them, 4 lawyers from Whitmore and Associates, all in identical dark suits, all with the patient hunger of people paid to win. Helena Pruitt sat beside Claire. Helena had been flown in from New York that morning. She was in her early 40s, dark hair pulled back, eyes that had a particular quality, the quality of someone who had been underestimated by opposing counsel many times and had developed a sophisticated appreciation for the moment they stopped doing it. She had never lost a custody case in 15 years. The hearing began. The Holloway lawyers presented their case with the smooth efficiency of a very expensive machine. 3 psychiatrists who had never examined Claire, affidavits from colleagues of Marcus's who had, according to their statements, witnessed erratic behavior, a carefully constructed narrative of a woman unraveling under the strain of a difficult marriage. Judge Bellamy listened. She read. She asked precise, quiet questions. Then she looked at the Holloway lawyers over her reading glasses and said, "I note that all 3 of your psychiatric experts are affiliated with institutions that have received significant donations from the Holloway Family Foundation in the past decade." The lead lawyer's smile held. He said, "The qualifications of our experts are beyond question." Judge Bellamy said, "I did not question their qualifications. I questioned their objectivity. There is a difference." Miss Pruitt. Helena rose with the ease of someone entirely at home. She said, "My client is happy to submit to any psychiatric evaluation this court deems appropriate. She has nothing to hide. She is a devoted mother who has been through a horrific trauma and is fighting for the right to raise her own daughter." She gestured to her paralegal. She said, "What you have before you is a comprehensive timeline of Marcus Holloway's abuse of his wife over 7 years of marriage, financial manipulation, social isolation, sabotage of her fertility treatments, and ultimately attempted murder." She walked the judge through the evidence, GPS data, showing exactly where Marcus stopped the car and for precisely how long. Weather records confirming that conditions were life-threatening. Medical records documenting Claire's hypothermia. Bank records showing the transfers and the house listing time-stamped before Marcus even got in the car on Christmas Eve. The Holloway lawyers objected. Helena answered each objection with the calm precision of someone who had anticipated them all and prepared accordingly. Then Helena called Dr. Marsh to the stand. Dr. Marsh sat in the witness chair and looked slightly uncomfortable in the formal setting, the way practical people always look in rooms designed for performance. Helena said, "In your professional opinion, how did Mrs. Holloway handle the crises of the past several weeks?" Dr. Marsh said, "With remarkable composure. I have been practicing medicine for 30 years. I have seen people fall apart under far less pressure." Mrs. Holloway remained calm, followed instructions, and fought to protect her baby even when her own life was in danger. If she were mentally unstable, she would have crumbled. She did not crumble. Helena said, "And her relationship with her daughter?" Dr. Marsh said, "Loving, attentive, appropriate in every way. That baby is thriving. She is gaining weight on schedule despite being premature. She is bonded with her mother exactly as a healthy infant should be." Her voice hardened. She said, "Taking that child away from her mother at this stage would cause genuine psychological harm. I would stake my medical license on that assessment." The Holloway lawyers cross-examined. They called Dr. Marsh a country doctor rather than a specialist. Implied emotional involvement had compromised her objectivity. Suggested she had been paid to testify favorably. Dr. Marsh said, "I delivered that baby in a blizzard with no hospital backup. I watched her mother nearly die protecting her. And now you are suggesting I cannot objectively assess their relationship." She looked at the lead lawyer with the expression of someone who has very limited patience for nonsense. She said, "With respect, I have seen more in 30 years of rural medicine than your entire firm has seen in its climate-controlled offices." The lawyers wisely ended their cross-examination. Then they called Sophia Reed. Sophia took the stand in a pale blue dress, her pregnancy visible now at 6 months, her face arranged in an expression of reluctant, sympathetic concern. She testified about an alleged incident in which Claire had threatened to harm herself, gave specific details, dates, words she claimed to have heard. Helena waited until she was done. Then Helena said, "You said this occurred approximately a year ago." Sophia said, "Yes, around then." Helena said, "So roughly December of last year." Sophia said, "Yes." Helena picked up a document. She said, "I have phone records showing that Marcus Holloway's phone was not used to contact you at any point in December of last year. The first call between your numbers that month was December 28th, 3 days after Christmas." Sophia went the color of old paper. She said, "I might be confused about the exact date." Helena said, "You might also be confused about the fact that Mrs. Holloway was not pregnant a year ago. She conceived in late April. The pregnancy you claim, she threatened, did not exist yet." Sophia said, "The timeline might be..." Helena said. Ms. Reed, are you aware that you just committed perjury? The Holloway lawyers erupted. Sophia looked desperately toward Edward Holloway in the gallery, toward the lawyers who had coached her, and then she looked at Claire, at the woman whose life she had helped destroy, at the mother holding her sleeping baby with fierce protectiveness. Something shifted in Sophia's face. She said, I need to speak with my own lawyer. Judge Bellamy struck the testimony, noted the implications for the district attorney's office, and then delivered her ruling in the quiet, precise tone of someone who had seen enough. Emergency custody petition, denied. However, a full 90-day custody evaluation was ordered, with regular home visits by a court-appointed social worker. Claire walked out of the court into the cold January air. Grace was asleep in her carrier. James was waiting on the steps. He saw her face and exhaled. She said, We won. For now. He said, Come on. Let us go home. Home. The word felt strange in her mouth. Her home had been a brownstone in Boston that had never legally been hers. But as they drove through the winter landscape toward the stone estate, Claire realized something quietly and completely. Home was not a building. Home was the people who chose to fight for you when you could not fight for yourself. She had found that somehow, in the wreckage of the worst night of her life. Maybe, she thought, there was something to be said for blizzards that pushed you toward the right doors. 2 weeks after the custody hearing, Claire found the newspaper clipping. She was in James's study looking for a book he had recommended, A History of Vermont's Early Settlers, which was exactly the kind of thing James recommended and which she had come to find genuinely comforting. She knocked a folder off the desk, reaching for the shelf. Papers scattered across the floor. She knelt to gather them, and a headline caught her eye. Wealthy financier, questioned in wife's death. A photograph. James, younger, being escorted by police officers into a building. His face was tight, defensive. Nothing like the man she had come to know over the past weeks. She read the article with hands that grew steadily colder. James Whitfield, 42, was questioned today by investigators regarding the circumstances of his wife Eleanor's death. Sources close to the investigation say concerns were raised about discrepancies in Whitfield's initial statement and the timeline of events in the weeks before Mrs. Whitfield's passing. The article was dated 3 years ago, months after Eleanor had supposedly died of cancer. Supposedly. Claire heard footsteps in the hallway. She put the papers back quickly, but her mind was running every scenario simultaneously, and none of them were comfortable. That night she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photograph, James's face, the police officers, the word discrepancies. In the morning, she confronted him. She said, I found something in your study yesterday, an article from 3 years ago, about you being questioned by police after Eleanor's death. James went very still. She said, You told me she died of cancer. You never mentioned an investigation. He sat down, slowly, the way people sit when their legs are not entirely reliable. He said, Eleanor did die of cancer. That part was true, but the way it happened at the end. He stopped. Gathered himself. He said, She was in so much pain in the final weeks. The cancer had spread everywhere. The doctor said a matter of weeks, but every day was worse than the day before. She begged me to help her end it. He said, I could not do what she asked. But I thought about it. I talked to her doctors about increasing her pain medication, about making her as comfortable as possible in whatever time she had left. A nurse overheard part of that conversation and reported it to the authorities. He met Claire's eyes. He said, They investigated for 2 months, reviewed every medical record, analyzed every toxicology report, interviewed everyone in the house during those final days. She said, and, he said, She died of cancer, exactly as stated. I had done nothing illegal. I was just a man who had watched his wife die in agony and was now being treated like a criminal by people who should have been offering condolences. He buried his face in his hands. He said, "The investigation was closed. No charges were filed. But the rumors never completely went away. Business associates looked at me differently. Some friends stopped calling. That is the real reason I became a recluse. Not just grief, the shame of knowing that people thought I was capable of killing the woman I loved most in the world." Claire was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Marcus, about how smooth he had always been, how unshakable, how he had never once let his guard down in 7 years of marriage because he had no genuine feeling to guard. This was different. Everything about this was different, she said. "Why did you not tell me?" He said, "Because I was afraid. Afraid you would look at me the way everyone else did. Afraid you would question everything." She said, "Bibistomandaitan." I did question everything. Last night. He said, "I know, and I deserve that." She looked at him carefully. She said, "I spent 7 years married to a man who lied to me about everything. I cannot go through that again. If there is anything else, anything at all, I need to know it now." He said, "There is nothing else. I swear it." She said, "Then we start fresh, from this moment. Complete honesty regardless of how uncomfortable. Can you do that?" He said, "Yes," without hesitation. She nodded slowly. The trust that had been shaken was not fully restored. That would take time. But it had not been destroyed. It had been tested, and perhaps that was necessary. Perhaps everything worth having needed to be tested before it could be fully believed. She said, "Okay, then we move forward." James crossed the room and took her hands. His grip was careful, grateful, the grip of a man who understood precisely what he had just been given. He said, "Thank you for believing me, for giving me the chance to explain." She said, "Do not make me regret it." He said, "I will not. I promise you, I will not." They stood together in the morning light coming through the study windows. Two people learning to trust again in the particular halting way that trust must be rebuilt after it has been damaged. Not quickly, not without caution, but genuinely. And sometimes genuine was the only thing that mattered. Sophia Reed appeared at the estate 3 weeks after the custody hearing. Margaret came to find Claire in the nursery with an expression that conveyed a great deal without words. She said, "There is someone here to see you, someone I suspect you do not want to see, but she came alone and she says it is important." Claire looked at Grace sleeping in the crib. She said, "Send her up, but stay close." Sophia appeared in the nursery doorway, looking nothing like she had at the hearing. The polished confidence was gone. Dark circles under her eyes, a nervous tension in the way she held herself. Her pregnancy more pronounced now, perhaps 6 months along. She said, "Thank you for seeing me. I know I do not deserve it." Claire said, "You tried to take my daughter with lies." Sophia said, "I know, and I am sorry, but that is not why I'm here." She looked around the room as if checking for something she could not name. She said, "I think they're going to kill me." Claire said, "What?" Sophia said, "After the hearing, after I broke down on the stand, Edward and Patricia were furious. They said I had ruined everything, that I was a liability now." She pressed her hands over her belly. She said, "Marcus called me from jail. He said if I ever testified against the family again, I would disappear. He said it the way he says everything, quietly, calmly, like he was describing something that had already happened." Claire said, "Marcus says a lot of things to frighten people." Sophia said, "There was a woman before you, Amanda Reyes, his girlfriend at Harvard. She filed a police report against him and then withdrew all the charges. She accepted a payment and agreed to stay quiet. She paused. She said, 3 months after she took the money, she died. Single vehicle accident on a rainy night. The police ruled it accidental. The room was very still. Sophia reached into her bag and produced a USB drive. She said, "Everything is on here. Emails between Marcus and his father discussing what to do about you. Text messages to people I do not know the names of, but whose involvement you can infer from context. Financial records showing payments to offshore accounts, and recorded phone calls." She set the drive on the changing table. She said, "Play the one dated December 15th. Claire took the drive. She found James. They sat in the library, together, and played the recording. Patricia Holloway's voice filled the room, elegant, measured, the voice of a woman accustomed to being listened to. She said, "We could arrange something quiet, something that could not be traced back to us. A car accident, a break-in. There are people who specialize in these things," Marcus said, "and the baby." Patricia said, "The baby stays with us. Obviously. That child is a Holloway regardless of what its mother was. Was. Present tense used as past, as if Claire was already dead in their minds and they were simply managing the logistics." James set down the drive very carefully. His face was the particular controlled expression of a man managing a significant amount of fury. He said, "This is conspiracy to commit murder. They are discussing killing you like it is a quarterly business decision." Claire said, "We need to be strategic. If we go to the police and someone tips them off, they destroy the evidence and deny everything." He said, "Copies, multiple locations. And if anything happens to you, it goes public automatically." She said, "If anything happens to me." James said, "I am doubling the security, effective today, 3 days before Marcus's trial." Claire was driving back from a meeting with Helena when the black SUV appeared in her rearview mirror. It followed her for a mile. Then it accelerated and rammed her car from behind. The impact sent her skidding across the icy road. She fought the wheel, overcorrected, and her car spun twice before slamming into the guardrail. She sat in the wreckage, dazed. Blood from a cut on her forehead, airbag deflating against her chest. The SUV pulled alongside her. A man's face appeared at the window, hard-featured, professional. The face of someone paid to be present without feeling anything about it. He said, "Mrs. Holloway, I think it is time we had a conversation." He had a gun. He said, "We know about the recordings. We just need to know where they are stored. Tell us where you have hidden them and disable whatever safeguards you have set up. And this ends quietly." Claire said, "If anything happens to me, that evidence goes public automatically. I have made certain of it." The man said, "We assumed you had set up something like that, which is why we are not going to kill you. Just a long, detailed conversation." He said, "Your daughter, for instance. Such a beautiful baby. It would be tragic if something happened to her." Something inside Claire went completely still, and then it went somewhere else. Somewhere past fear, somewhere she had never quite been before, but recognized immediately when she arrived. She said, "You touch my daughter, and I will burn everything the Holloway family has ever built to the ground. I will salt the earth so nothing ever grows there again." The man's eyes flickered. She said, "I have already died once on a frozen highway and walked out of it. I gave birth in a stranger's house with no hospital. I faced your employers in a courtroom and won. A gun does not scare me. The only thing that scares me is not finishing what I started." She held his gaze without moving. He lowered the gun. He said, "This is not over." She said, "No, but when it is finished, you and everyone who sent you will be in prison. Count on it." The SUV pulled away into the dark. Claire sat in her wrecked car and shook for exactly 4 minutes. Then she called James. She said, "They came for me. I am okay, but we end this tonight." That night, Claire and James released everything. Every recording, every email, every document, every financial record, to every major network simultaneously. Rachel had contacts at 3 of them. Helena had contacts at 2 more. Within the hour, every major news outlet in the country was running the story. By midnight, the hashtag Justice for Claire was trending globally. By morning, protesters stood outside Holloway Holdings headquarters in Boston. By noon, every major business partner had suspended their relationship with the family. The company's stock dropped 42% in a single trading session. Patricia Holloway was taken into custody for questioning. Her lawyers spent 40 minutes attempting to prevent it. They failed. Marcus, in holding, was placed on suicide watch. Diane texted Claire at 11:47 p.m. CNN just called him a man of almost theatrical villainy. I am framing this. I am having it embroidered on a pillow and displayed in my home. Claire sat in James's library and watched the world learn the truth. The recordings played on every screen. Experts analyzed, commentators discussed, and through it all, her own face appeared. Pre-recorded, telling her story in her own words. Simply, directly, without embellishment. The night on the highway, the walk through the snow, the doorstep, Grace's birth, the custody hearing, the threats, the man with the gun, all of it. And America listened. Gray February morning, snow threatening on the horizon. Claire took the witness stand at 10:15 in the morning. Simple dark dress, minimal makeup. Grace was at home with Margaret and a security team James had hired without discussion. Helena led her through the events of Christmas Eve, the drive, the stop on the highway, Marcus's words, the cold, the walk. Claire told it without embellishment. Let the facts carry the weight. Let the jury see the truth in her steady voice and her steady hands resting on the rail in front of her. Helena said, "And what happened when you reached the Whitfield estate?" Claire said, "I collapsed on the doorstep. James Whitfield found me and brought me inside. Dr. Marsh came as soon as the roads allowed. They saved my life." Helena said, "And your daughter?" Claire said, "Grace was born 2 days later, premature but healthy." Dr. Marsh called it a miracle. Defense counsel objected. Characterizing the birth as a miracle was, Judge Patricia Ford said, overruled. Given the circumstances, I think miracle is a reasonable description. Proceed. Helena continued. She said, "Mrs. Holloway, in the months since your rescue, have you been the target of threats or intimidation?" Claire said, "Yes, the Holloway family filed a false custody petition using manufactured evidence and paid expert witnesses. When that failed, they sent a man to run me off the road and threaten me at gunpoint. He told me they would harm my daughter if I did not give them the recordings that exposed their crimes." Defense counsel was on his feet. He said, "This is unsubstantiated and inflammatory." Helena held up a folder. She said, "We have police reports, witness statements, and surveillance footage from a gas station near the crash site, showing the vehicle that attacked Mrs. Holloway. The driver has been identified as a known associate of the Holloway family's private security firm." Defense counsel sat down. His face had the particular color of someone recalibrating in real time. Helena said, "Mrs. Holloway, why did you release those recordings publicly rather than simply providing them to law enforcement?" Claire turned to face the jury. She said, "Because I was afraid. The Holloway family has money everywhere and influence everywhere. I had already watched them manufacture evidence and pay for false testimony. I had heard recordings of them discussing my murder like it was a budget line item. I released those recordings because I wanted the world to see the truth before Yishun could bury it. I wanted millions of witnesses, people who could not be bought or intimidated or silenced." She looked at each face in the jury box. She said, "And I wanted Marcus Holloway and his family to understand something, that I am not afraid of them anymore, that the truth is more powerful than all their money combined, that a woman they left to die on a frozen highway in a blizzard is standing in this courtroom, and she is not going anywhere." The courtroom was silent. Helena said, "No further questions." Defense counsel rose for cross-examination with the expression of a man contractually obligated to try. He said, "Mrs. Holloway, is it not true that you had a troubled relationship with your husband?" She said, "My relationship was troubled because he was abusing me. He isolated me from friends and family. He controlled our finances. He sabotaged my fertility treatments for 3 years, while I believed I was the reason we could not conceive. And when I was no longer useful to him, he drove me to a frozen highway and told me to walk." Defense counsel said, "That is your characterization of," Claire said, "that is what the evidence shows. GPS data, phone records, bank transfers, recorded conversations, in which his mother discusses arranging my death like she is booking a restaurant. You can present whatever narrative you choose, but the facts do not change. Marcus Holloway tried to murder me, and he would have succeeded if I had not found James Whitfield's doorstep." Defense counsel tried several more approaches. Each one landed and did not bounce. Finally, he said, "No further questions." Claire stepped down from the witness stand, walked past Marcus without looking at him, past his parents, sitting rigid and pale in the gallery, past the cameras and the watching world. She walked out of the courtroom with her head up. She did not look back. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Claire was in the waiting room with James and Diane when her phone rang. Diane picked it up, listened, and then her face did something complicated and final and complete. She said, "Guilty. All counts." Claire closed her eyes. Attempted murder, first degree, reckless endangerment, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, all of it. Every charge. Diane said, "He is never getting out, Claire. The prosecutor is pushing for 30 to life. Given the premeditation and the ongoing conspiracy, he will die in prison." Claire opened her eyes. She said, "What about his parents?" Diane said, "Separate trials scheduled. Edward is looking at RICO charges and conspiracy. Patricia is facing conspiracy to commit murder based on the recordings. The whole family is going down, every single one of them." Claire looked at James. He was watching her with an expression she had learned to read over the past 2 months, steady, present, entirely, unconditionally there. She said, "It is over." He said, "It is really over." She said, "I do not know how to..." He said, "Do not know how to what?" She said, "Feel this. I have been fighting for so long that I do not know what it feels like to stop." He said quietly, "You stop, and then you stay stopped, and then eventually it starts to feel like something else." She said, "What does it feel like?" He said, "I am told it feels like peace. I've been working toward it myself. Ask me again in a few months." Despite everything, despite the weight of the past 2 months and the years before them, Claire laughed. It felt like something breaking loose, something that had been held tight for a very long time, finally allowed to move. 1 year to the day. The estate's gardens had never looked more beautiful. Spring flowers and planned explosions of color along the stone walls. Tables set with white linen on the emerald lawn. String lights hung from the ancient oak trees, waiting for evening. The mountains in the distance, still snow-capped, but softening at the edges, the way everything softened when the season finally turned. Claire stood at the edge of the celebration and looked at what she had built from nothing. Diane was deep in conversation with Helena about a foundation they were establishing together. Resources for women in situations like Claire's, legal support, and emergency funding, and the particular kind of help that arrives without conditions attached. Dr. Marsh sat in the most comfortable chair on the lawn, telling a story to a circle of listeners about a delivery she had done in the back of a pickup truck in 1994, and the healthy 29-year-old that child had grown into. Thomas, James's son, home from his second year of college, was chasing Grace across the lawn with the absolute commitment of a young man who had adopted a baby as a personal project and taken his responsibilities seriously. Thomas had texted his father 3 weeks into Claire's residency. "Dad, I like her. Do not be weird about this." James had not replied. Thomas had texted again. "I know you saw this. You always see texts. Do not be weird." Grace toddled toward Claire with the determined, lurching gait of a 14-month-old who had decided walking was her domain, and falling was simply data collection. Dark hair, her mother's eyes, a stubbornness that was, as James had noted on multiple occasions, entirely genetic. Grace said, "Mama, cake." Claire said, "Soon, baby. We have to wait for everyone." Grace said, "Cake now." Claire said, "You are absolutely my daughter." James appeared beside them with 2 glasses of champagne and the particular expression he wore when he was happy and still slightly surprised to be so. He said, "She has been asking about cake for 45 minutes. "I respect the commitment," Claire said. "She gets it from me." He said, "This is what I suspected." He raised his glass to 1 year. She clinked hers against his. To 1 year, and many more. Margaret appeared at Claire's elbow with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had organized this entire celebration and had opinions about the pacing. She said, "The caterers are ready, and it is time for your speech." Claire said, "I did not prepare a speech." Margaret said, "You do not need to prepare. Just speak from the heart." She took Grace with the confidence of someone who had been doing this since December and considered it her rightful domain. "Now go say what needs to be said." Before Claire could object, she found herself at the small platform at the center of the garden. Guests gathering, conversations fading. She looked out at the faces she had come to love, the people who had chosen her when she had nothing left to choose with. She took a breath. She said, "1 year ago tonight, I was dying." The garden went completely quiet. She said, "I was lying on a doorstep in a blizzard, my body giving up. My baby in danger, abandoned by the person who was supposed to love me most. I had lost everything. My home, my money, my faith in people, and very nearly my life." She paused. She said, and then a door opened. She looked at James. He was standing at the edge of the crowd. His eyes were bright. She said, "A stranger carried me inside. A family I had never met poured everything they had into saving my life. And when my daughter was born 2 days later, she entered a world already full of people who had chosen to care about her." Her voice strengthened. She said, "I have learned a great deal this year. I have learned that family is a choice, not a blood type. I have learned that survival is not about strength. It is about stubbornness. And I have learned that the darkest moments of our lives can become foundations for something extraordinary if we are willing to let them." She looked at Dr. Marsh, who was watching with the expression of someone professionally opposed to sentiment and currently losing that battle. She looked at Diane, who was not even pretending. She looked at Margaret, who had Grace on her hip and was quietly, steadily crying, while simultaneously making faces at the baby to keep her entertained. She said, "I have also learned that love does not come with guarantees. It comes with risk and fear and the constant possibility of pain. But it also comes with moments like this one. Surrounded by people who chose us, holding futures we never expected, living lives that seemed impossible 12 months ago." She raised her glass. She said, "So here is to doorsteps, to strangers who become family, to children who teach us what matters, and to every person who has ever stood on a frozen road in the dark and decided to walk toward the light anyway. You are not alone. You never were. And the door at the end of that walk is worth everything it takes to reach it." The toast echoed across the garden, glasses raised, voices overlapping. Claire stepped down from the platform and walked directly to James. He wrapped his arms around her. He said against her hair, "That was beautiful." She said, "It was true, every word of it." He pulled back to look at her. He said, "I have something for you. I was going to wait until later, but Margaret told me that if I waited any longer, she would do it herself, and that seemed wrong." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Claire's breath caught. He said, "Before you say anything, this is not what you might think. Not exactly." He opened the box, a thin gold band, a small emerald between two diamonds, simple and old and clearly beloved. He said, "This was Eleanor's grandmother's ring. Eleanor wore it every day of our marriage. After she died, I kept it in a drawer because I could not look at it without." He stopped, began again. He said, "I am not asking you to marry me. I know you are not ready for that, and I understand it, and I respect it completely. But I am asking you to wear this, to carry a piece of Eleanor with you, to be part of this family's history wherever that history takes us." Claire looked at the ring, at this small circle of gold that held a whole other love inside it, a love that had ended, a love that this man had carried through grief and isolation and the long, quiet work of learning to exist again after loss. She said, "Are you certain?" He said, "Thomas picked it. He said Eleanor would have wanted you to have it. He also said, and I am quoting directly, that if I missed this moment, he would disown me and adopt you instead, and that seemed like a reasonable threat to take seriously." Claire laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and real and does not apologize for itself. She said, "Then yes, I will wear it." James slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting. She said, "I love you, James Whitfield. I love you and your son and your housekeeper and your country doctor and the fact that you opened a door in a blizzard at midnight for a woman you had never met. I love this house. I love this life. I love who I am when I am inside it." He said, "I love you too, in ways I did not think I would ever love again. And I am grateful for you every single day." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips. When they finally separated, both of them were the kind of happy that does not require performance. From across the garden, Thomas's voice. "Finally. I have been waiting for this for months. This has been a genuine ordeal. Diane." "He is not wrong, Dr. Marsh. I am choosing not to have a medical opinion about any of this." Margaret, from very nearby, with Grace on her hip. "I knew from the second day. I said nothing because I have patience. But I knew," James said quietly, for Claire only. "Eleanor would have approved of you. I am completely certain." Claire said, "You keep saying that." He said, "Because I keep believing it more." She looked at him. At this man who had pulled her off a cold doorstep and stood beside her through everything that followed, who had let her see his grief and his fear and his past without asking her to manage any of it, who had rebuilt himself slowly and carefully in the same months she had rebuilt herself, and who had somehow, without either of them planning it, rebuilt something together. She said, "I think she sent me to your door." He said, "I think so too. I thought for a long time that her being gone meant the best part of my life was behind me. Then a woman showed up on my doorstep on Christmas Eve and proved me completely wrong. He touched her face. He said, I am so grateful you walked through that blizzard. She said, I am so grateful you opened the door. Grace toddled toward them across the grass, Thomas loping behind her with the good-natured exasperation of a young man who had been outmaneuvered by a 1-year-old. The spring sun was setting over the Vermont mountains in long bands of orange and gold. The gardens were fully awake now, daffodils along the stone walls, apple blossoms starting in the old orchard, the world returning to itself after the long cold. Claire picked up her daughter and held her against her chest. Grace grabbed a fistful of Claire's hair with the enthusiastic grip of someone who had not yet learned that this was considered impolite, and pressed her face against her mother's cheek. Mama, she said. Claire pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head. She said, I know, baby girl, I know. It was not a fairy tale. Fairy tales were for people who had never had to survive anything real. Fairy tales skipped the blizzards and the courtrooms and the man with a gun and the 3 a.m. nights when everything still felt too fragile to fully believe in. This was not a fairy tale. This was better. This was a life built from the wreckage of another life, built carefully, built honestly, built by people who had chosen each other in the cold and kept choosing each other as the world warmed back up. James put his arm around her shoulders. Thomas joined them, slinging his arm around his father's, completing the circle. Margaret appeared with an expression of profound satisfaction, and the emergency scones she had quietly produced sometime in the last half hour. Diane said, There are scones, at a garden party in spring. Margaret, I need you in my life permanently. Margaret said, I am aware of my value. Thank you. Dr. Marsh said, I will take the 2. For medicinal purposes. The string lights came on as the sun finished setting, amber and gold against the darkening sky. The mountains held the last light for a long moment before releasing it. Claire stood in the middle of all of it and let herself feel exactly what she felt. Not managing it, not reducing it for anyone's comfort, just feeling it fully and completely. She thought, I walked out of the worst night of my life, and somehow it led me here, she thought. Grace Eleanor, named for Grace and for a woman she never met, and for the extraordinary, ordinary miracle of surviving. She thought home, not a building, not an address, not something that could be sold out from under her, or taken away or falsely signed in someone else's name. These people, this choice and this choosing and this quiet, persistent practice of showing up for each other, even when showing up was hard. This was home. This was everything. And somewhere in Vermont, in a stone estate full of string lights and emergency scones and the particular warmth of people who had chosen each other through the worst and stayed for the best. A door that had been closed for 3 years stood wide open, letting in the spring. She walked into a blizzard with nothing. She walked out with everything that actually mattered. And the woman who had been left to die on a frozen highway was now standing in a garden full of light, holding her daughter, held by her family, living the life that should have always been hers. It took a blizzard to find the right door, but she found it, and she walked through. Closing editorial note. The content in this video was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team. Crafted with care to bring you stories that carry genuine meaning, real emotional truth, and lessons worth carrying into your own life. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here.